Your position is no longer essential, he said, with that smug tech bro calm people use right before they walk into traffic wearing VR goggles. Across the table, the CEO gave me that empty smile he practiced in mirrors and investor decks. Behind him, the HR director blinked like a hostage reading off a ransom note. The whole room smelled like vanilla air freshener and cowardice. I didn't say a word, just set my security badge on the table like a poker chip, slid the folder across the glass, and waited for the thank you they'd rehearsed. He launched into some hallmark eulogy about your years of service and the shifting priorities of today's competitive defense landscape, which is corporate for some McKinsey intern told me you're expensive. I nodded, polite as hell. Let the man keep his dignity while he signed his own execution notice. He thought he was pruning dead weight. What he didn't realize? I was the soil, the named security officer, the compliance backbone, the clearance holder whose federal authorization literally propped up the firm's defense charter. No signature from me, no contracts. No contracts, no business. But sure, Ted, let's call this restructuring. On the surface, I looked calm, professional, the boring woman in the sensible shoes who never caused trouble. But inside, it wasn't rage. It wasn't even betrayal. It was that click you hear when the last puzzle piece slides into place and you see the full picture, how deeply, profoundly doomed they were. Because here's the thing about defense compliance. You can't just fire the keyholder and expect the vault to stay open. There are rules. And while they spent their days whining and dining investors with buzzwords and balsamic glazed horseshit, I was the one quietly renewing our clearance paperwork, maintaining federal liaisons, ensuring every dotted I stood between us and a six-figure stop work order. Oh, and before I forget, if you like stories where corporate arrogance face plants into federal law, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Maybe toss a like while you're at it. It keeps our little team caffeinated and helps more people find stories like this before they get blindsided by some khaki-clad idiot with a restructuring PowerPoint. Back to the office. They had me escorted out like I might steal staplers or scream about injustice. As if I had to raise my voice. I signed the exit docs, smiled at the poor intern who couldn't make eye contact, and walked out without looking back. No drama. No scenes. Just me, my dignity, and one last email I sent from my personal laptop before the system locked me out. The subject line was simple. Clearance oversight. Termination update. I copied 2 federal agencies, per protocol. Included the date and time my responsibilities ended. Attached the signed SF-328. Closed the laptop. They thought it was over. What they didn't realize was that paperwork doesn't care about egos. That document alone? It nullified our defense charter, retroactively. Without a named clearance holder with valid authorization, every classified contract they'd touched since that moment became an expensive liability. But hey, I'm just a quiet former employee. What do I know? I went home, made tea, and sat by the window. Not angry, not smug, just still. There's a certain peace that settles in your chest when you know a storm is coming, and you're not the one who has to lift a finger to cause it. They wanted a leaner company. They're about to find out what it's like when compliance vanishes entirely. By the time I'd pulled out of the parking lot, HR had already flagged my credentials for revocation. You could feel the desperation in their email timestamps. One at 3:04 p.m., one at 3:07, then another at 3:08 marked urgent, urgent, urgent. They were trying to chase the bullet after they pulled the trigger. IT disabled my login by 3:12, and by 3:20 the building's entire security system had been updated to treat me like a threat. Which is poetic, considering I spent a decade protecting that firm from actual ones. I sat in my car, engine still running, and opened my personal inbox. One new message, just a quiet gray font auto-reply from a DoD address. No emojis, no alarms, just 7 words that snapped like piano wire. Update received. Subject, facility clearance reevaluation. That's when I knew it had begun. You'd think I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, but I didn't. Not then. What I felt was sad. The kind of sad that feels like a slow exhale, like watching a car crash you couldn't stop. I liked my job. I took pride in it, in knowing every policy, every clause, every person I kept out of prison with a well-timed compliance memo. I wasn't the star. I was the scaffolding. And scaffolding only gets noticed when it's gone and someone falls off the roof. I drove home slow, letting the radio talk about something mindless. Traffic, pumpkin spice shortages, some senator who fell asleep on live TV. But my brain kept drifting back to that folder they left on my desk. White label. Sharpie scrawl. Form SF328. Do not shred. I'd filled it out the week before, left it in plain sight during my exit meeting, and watched HR's intern glance at it, squint, then slide it aside like a coffee coupon. They had no idea that form wasn't optional. It was everything. Because once I submitted the termination update and failed to designate a new FSO within 24 hours, the facility clearance process didn't just freeze. It rewound. Contracts under review went cold. Existing contracts lost shield. Classified communication got flagged. And worst of all, the firm was no longer legally authorized to touch any of the data it had access to 15 minutes prior. But hey, I'm sure Brad from consulting will get it sorted. After all, he shadowed me for half a day back in April. Meanwhile, the guy they installed as my replacement, Tyler, I think, sent his excited to join the team Slack message before he even got his credentials approved. I'd seen his LinkedIn the night before. Compliance enthusiast, no clearances, no active certs, but he had that hungry MBA face and a TEDx talk on leadership. Good luck with Form 254, buddy. By sunset, I was curled up on my couch with a blanket, a cat on my lap, and an email draft from a former colleague blinking on my screen. Subject line, "Are you okay?" She'd heard something. She always did. I didn't reply. Not yet. It wasn't my turn to act anymore. Let the system run its course. Let the efficiency cuts hit the walls they never saw coming. Let the CEO discover, slowly and with dawning horror, that federal law does not give a single damn about synergy, vibes, or shareholder value. The company thought I was just a name on some org chart. They were about to find out I was the signature. By Friday morning, he was already strutting across the auditorium stage like a televangelist selling salvation through synergy. The all-hands meeting was mandatory, which meant half the staff dragged themselves in, nursing resentment and bad coffee. The other half tuned in remotely, muted, cameras off, already hate-scrolling job boards under the table. Me? I watched the replay a day later, curious how delusional the man would get in front of a crowd he barely knew. He started with buzzwords. Transformation, agility, vision verticals. You could feel morale deflating with every slide. Then came the self-congratulation. "I'm proud to announce a successful restructuring of our compliance architecture," he said, gesturing to an org chart that now looked like someone spilled alphabet soup on a whiteboard. "We've eliminated redundancy, consolidated oversight, and streamlined outdated processes." Translated from CEO to English, I cut everyone who told me no. Then he waved over a guy who looked barely old enough to rent a car. "This is Tyler. He's joining us as interim director of regulatory operations. Not compliance, not security. Regulatory operations. The kind of title you invent when someone's unqualified, but you still want them to sound important." Tyler wore skinny slacks and a baby blue blazer like he'd been peeled off a startup ad. He grinned like he didn't realize he was stepping into a minefield and said, "Thrilled to be here. Let's make compliance awesome again." Somewhere in the back, an engineer snorted into his thermos. No one clapped, but no one challenged it either. They never do, not in real time. That's how men like our CEO thrive, by surrounding themselves with silence and people who confuse LinkedIn endorsements for actual qualifications. He clicked to the next slide, a bullet point list of upcoming milestones. At the bottom, finalizing submission for Project Cardinal, Q4. That one made me sit up. Project Cardinal wasn't just a classified bid. It was classified high side. Any involvement required an active facility security officer with Tier 3 clearance minimum. No exceptions. No consultant oversight. And to file, the submission had to include the FSO's full name, badge number, and signature on 3 different forms. And guess whose name was pre-printed on the application? Mine. Because those templates were created months ago, when I was still the named officer. And no one had updated the forms, or the policies, or the approval workflows. They just hit send, assuming automation would cover their incompetence. I imagined the legal intern responsible for filing it, dutifully uploading the packet to CyberNet, never realizing the minute they submitted with my name but without my current designation, they'd triggered a compliance red flag that made Homeland Security blink twice. But sure, streamline it, buddy. The kicker? The CEO ended his speech with a cheesy little mantra. "In this company," he said, "we don't cling to the past, we build the future." The crowd clapped this time. Or maybe the sound guy just hit the track. Back in my living room, I poured a fresh cup of tea and smiled like a woman watching the last 5 minutes of a true crime documentary, where the villain realizes the phone calls were coming from inside the house. The arrogance wasn't what surprised me. It was the speed. He didn't just gut the compliance framework. He lit the match and asked everyone to admire the flame. But fire doesn't negotiate, and neither does federal code. Tyler may have had the blazer, but I had the badge. Or rather, I had it, until they took it from me. Now they had a paper trail with my name, no authority behind it, and a ticking regulatory time bomb disguised as a PowerPoint win. And somewhere in a government inbox, a caseworker was staring at Form 328, realizing their contact had been terminated mid-cycle. Tick. Tock. By Monday, the polite silence started turning jagged. It began with bounced emails. First just one or two, messages to federal liaisons that came back with vague errors or delay notices. Recipient unavailable. Delivery timed out. Mailbox full. But then came the rejections. One flagged sender. Two marked unverified facility. And a third that straight up read, "Clearance contact not recognized. Do not reply on this channel." Tyler told the team it was probably a firewall thing. He said it like someone who'd just Googled firewall on his phone and thought the issue would fix itself if he clicked refresh hard enough. By noon, procurement stalled. The systems themselves were fine, but vendors wouldn't release materials. Purchase orders hung in limbo. One vendor sent an apologetic message. "Until status is resolved, all shipments are paused. Apologies for the inconvenience." Vague, sure, but every sentence read like it had been vetted by 5 lawyers first. Meanwhile, Tyler kept walking around the office like a lost exchange student in a language immersion school. "I'm still getting up to speed," he told the finance lead. "This isn't my core strength," he admitted to a contracts manager. When asked if he'd submitted the FCL verification for Project Cardinal, he said, "That's a week 2 item." The man had no clearance, no training, and no idea that the clock had already stopped. Clients noticed. They always do. Quietly, at first. A usually warm project manager started replying with one-liners. A phone call was cut short with, "We'll revisit next cycle." One agency contact who'd always started emails with, hey, sent a terse, "Please confirm your FSO status as soon as possible." The lawyers upstairs started sweating. That's when they reached out to the Defense Industrial Base office. No reply. Not a maybe later bounce back or an automated, "Your ticket is in our queue." Just nothing. Like a switch flipped and the firm went from vendor in good standing to ghost with access to secrets. Because when a facility loses clearance, the government doesn't yell. It just stops talking. Somewhere around 3 p.m., the director of legal, a man who once laughed when I asked if he'd read the NISPOM, emailed the CEO. Short subject line, "FSO status, urgent." No reply. So he tried again, this time CCing 3 board members. Still silence. That night, I met someone at a little coffee shop near Crystal City, a place where the cappuccinos taste like regret and the baristas all wear lanyards with nothing printed on them. He was already seated, mid-50s, plain suit, no business card, just a folded manila envelope and a face that had seen a lot of people fall on their own swords. I sat down. He said nothing for a long while, just tapped the envelope once. "Do they know what they did?" he asked finally. I shrugged. "They think they saved money." He smirked. "They burned their parachute on the way up." We talked in circles, the way people in our world do. He never said the company's name. I never said mine. But he knew. They always do. His final question was the only one that mattered. "Are you willing to stay out of it?" I nodded. "I'm just a private citizen now." That phrase sat heavy between us. Not bitter, not smug, just final. I didn't need to fight them. I didn't need to whistleblow or leak or seek revenge. I had done my part, filed the forms, reported the termination, followed the process to the letter. The rest was gravity. The company hadn't been sabotaged. It was just following the rules I used to uphold. And now that no one was left to uphold them, those rules were finally having their say. The first real crack showed itself in the form of a rejection. Not a polite one, either. Just a hard-stop denial stamped across a PDF like a foreclosure notice. Incomplete submission. Unverified FSO credentials. It landed in legal's inbox at 8:47 a.m. By 9:10, every VP on the executive floor had seen it. By 9:20, someone finally asked out loud, "Wait, who signed our last DD Form 254? The room went still. Fingers hovered over keyboards. Emails paused mid-sentence. Tyler, who had spent the morning eating granola bars in someone else's office chair, looked up like a deer hearing its own eulogy. "I don't think I did," he said. "I mean, I reviewed some stuff. Maybe. It's all kind of a blur." That's when the panic started, because Form 254 wasn't just some internal memo. It's a legally binding document that authorizes the handling of classified information between entities. It requires the signature of the cleared FSO assigned to the contract. No FSO, no signature. No signature, no contract. It's not a "we'll fix it later" issue. It's a "you just opened a black site with a house key from Home Depot" issue. Legal tried to recover. "Okay, well, who's listed as our current FSO?" Someone pulled up the official record in JPass. Dead silence followed, because there was no current listing, no assigned officer, no continuity file, no valid signature since me. I wasn't just the last person to fill the role. I was the only one ever authorized for it at that clearance level. And, here's the kicker, on the last updated continuity form, I had been marked not just as the responsible officer, but as the sole continuity designee. It wasn't just sloppy oversight, it was total dependency. And now I was gone. In the legal war room, someone dropped their phone. Another began whispering into a headset, trying to figure out if the classified data delivered 2 weeks ago was now considered a breach. Because if that contract was executed under invalid credentials, that wasn't just a compliance issue. It was a federal violation. Tyler looked like he wanted to crawl into the fluorescent lights and disappear. "I thought Sarah transferred everything before she left," he said weakly. "She did," one of the paralegals snapped, voice tight. "She transferred it by filing the termination notice, which you didn't follow up on." By mid-morning, the CEO finally surfaced. Red tie, dead eyes. "Get it sorted," he growled. That was his leadership style. Bark at problems like they were disobedient dogs. But you can't bark at paper trails. You can't intimidate protocols. And you sure as hell can't bluff your way through classified compliance. The phone calls started shortly after. One from the prime contractor asking for clarification on our status. Another from a base liaison politely requesting we confirm active FSO coverage to maintain site access. And then, my favorite, a voicemail from a federal program manager, sharp and cold as steel. "Until verification is reestablished, consider your file and review. Access suspended." At home, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea while skimming through a gardening catalog I wasn't really reading. I hadn't checked my phone in hours. Didn't need to. I could feel the storm thickening. But somewhere under the surface, beneath the ache of betrayal, the disbelief that they'd been so reckless, something else stirred. Not glee, not revenge. Power. A quiet, unshakable sense of leverage, not the kind you wield like a weapon, but the kind you simply are. I hadn't done anything cruel. I hadn't sabotaged a single file or hidden a single form. I'd simply done my job, right up until the second they told me I wasn't essential. And then, like any good officer, I'd documented my departure with precision. They chose to ignore the rules. Now the rules were choosing not to ignore them. By Wednesday morning, the word suspended started making its rounds. Not whispered, not shouted, just quietly printed in sans serif across an email from the contracting office like it was nothing more than a status update. Subject: Program. Hold notification. Contract. Yakfor 0714. Body: pending verification of facility clearance status and security oversight personnel. All activity related to the above contract is hereby suspended until further notice. The CFO read it 3 times, then once more aloud, just to make sure he hadn't suffered a small stroke. But the language didn't change. Suspended. No timeline. No clause to negotiate. Just full stop. A multi-million-dollar contract parked on a side street with the hazard lights flashing and a boot on the tire. Downstairs, finance began to panic. Not loudly. Not yet. But a few inquiries popped up in the payroll system. Why wasn't the second disbursement for Division 6 processing? Why was the access flag showing authorization pending? Someone poked around and discovered that without an active FSO designation, the cost code tied to classified labor was invalid, which meant the payment approvals were locked. Automatically. No one could override it. You can't pay cleared employees without a valid contract, and you can't have a valid contract without an FSO. And they didn't have one. But oh, they had a memo. It came from legal, who by this point looked like they were aging in dog years. It was sent to department heads, team leads, even mid-level managers who didn't know what DD Form 254 meant a week ago. Subject: External Communication Protocols. Body: Effective immediately. Please refrain from contacting any former employees regarding compliance matters or prior security roles. All inquiries must route through legal or executive ops. They didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew. It hung over the office like stale cologne. HR printed the memo and taped it to the break room fridge, right above the expired oat milk and passive-aggressive notes about microwave etiquette. Back in the corner office, the CEO was no longer in campaign mode. No more LinkedIn posts about embracing change. No more team selfies. Just closed doors, muffled phone calls, and the faint smell of panic behind a $90 deodorant. He tried calling in favors. DHS, the contracting office, even some guy from his old consulting firm who used to know someone in the defense sector. Nobody answered. Or worse, they answered, listened, then said nothing meaningful before hanging up. Compliance doesn't do favors. It does forms. And his name wasn't on a single one that mattered. He stormed down to legal demanding to know why the FSO role couldn't be expedited. Because it's not a TSA pre-check, one of the lawyers muttered after he left. It's not a damn fast pass. That afternoon, I walked to my mailbox like I always did. Quiet street, crunchy leaves, sun sliding across the roof lines. In the box was a single envelope from a vendor I used to manage. Inside, a small thank you card with 3 words written in perfect cursive. You were right. I stood there for a moment, letting the wind push my hair across my cheek. A week ago, I was just another name in the directory. Not flashy, not loud, just a line item in a budget they didn't bother to understand. Now, I was the gap, the breach they never saw coming, the oversight no one could backfill with PowerPoints and interns, the silence that made the whole machine seize up. And funny thing about silence, it echoes louder the longer it lasts. The company hadn't imploded yet, not publicly, not catastrophically, but inside, the walls were closing in. Fast. They had traded certainty for charisma, policy for presentation, and me for Tyler. The only thing louder than the CEO's fury was the sound of 1,000 gears grinding to a halt because someone forgot to read the manual. And now I wasn't invisible anymore. It happened on a Thursday morning so quiet you could hear the copier jam from 3 rooms over. They arrived without fanfare. 2 federal agents in suits so plain they practically repelled small talk. No badges flashed, no SWAT theatrics. Just the kind of firm, measured gait that turns open floor chatter into held breath. One carried a slim leather folio. The other walked with his hands loose at his sides, like a man used to not needing to run. They checked in at reception with ID cards that made the intern's throat click audibly. She paged legal. Legal paged the CEO. The agents didn't sit down. They just waited. 5 minutes later, they were in the corner office with the glass walls and fake ficus. The door shut, blinds drawn. I wasn't there, obviously, but I knew the script. Agent 1 set the folio on the table like it was a final draft of someone's career obituary. Then he removed his glasses. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just a slow, practiced gesture that made the room colder somehow. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The woman whose security clearance holds your firm's charter, he said. Where is she? The CEO blinked. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I follow. She was terminated last week. Someone from legal jumped in. There was a restructuring initiative. We're in the process of... The agent didn't look at him. Just opened the folio and turned a document toward the CEO. Per your facility's own filings, the charter is valid only under the continuous supervision of the named facility security officer. He tapped the line. That name is Sarah Elaine Morgan. Clearance ID 7842B. He let that settle. No sound but the whisper of HVAC and one lawyer quietly dying inside. That oversight lapsed, the agent continued. There was no successor designation, no formal continuity plan submitted. As of 4:39 p.m. last Thursday, your firm has operated without a compliant FSO, which means nothing we've touched since then is legal. The CEO muttered, too fast. His voice cracked at the end. The second agent finally spoke. Including Project Cardinal. You could hear the breath suck out of the room like someone opened an airlock. Project Cardinal wasn't just any contract. It was a multi-agency initiative with embedded clearances, sensitive infrastructure maps, and an auditing clause that might as well have been written in blood. Submitting under false credentials wasn't just a disqualifier. It was a criminal act. The CEO tried to recover, lurching toward corporate speak like a drowning man grabbing a soggy mission statement. We were under the impression that our interim director had— Your interim director, the first agent said, glancing briefly at a secondary file, has no clearance, no recorded credentials, and no formal authority under any defense compliance structure. Legal opened his mouth again, then closed it. The CEO stared at the paper like he could will the words into meaning something else. But they didn't shift. Federal forms don't bend, they break. And right now, so was he, because it had finally hit him. Not the loss of a contract, not the embarrassment. The scale. The realization that every decision he'd made to trim fat, to move fast, to disrupt legacy systems, had culminated in a direct violation of the same laws that governed our firm's existence. He hadn't just fired a compliance officer. He had fired the keystone. And now the arch was collapsing. Elsewhere in the building, staff began noticing things. Meeting invites disappearing. Client logins revoked. Slack channels renamed to cryptic acronyms like prelim legal. Someone in HR cried in the stairwell. Someone else updated their resume during lunch. And me? I was sitting by the river with a paperback and a half-finished coffee, not far from the agency office where my clearance still lived quietly in good standing. The wind was nice. Geese honked. A man jogged past talking to his dog like they were coworkers. I didn't need to be there to watch the fall, because some things don't make noise when they break. They just stop working. By the next morning, the fallout had shape. Not rumors, not gut feelings. Paper. Stamped. Signed. Irrevocable. Project Cardinal. Contract status. Voided. It hit the inboxes like a funeral bell. A red seal notice from the contracting office, terse and surgical. They didn't bother with theatrics. Just a single paragraph, citing lapse in FSO designation, misrepresentation of security oversight, and non-compliance with clearance validation timelines. No appeals. No second chances. Attached beneath it, like a cherry on a toxic sundae, was a second notice. A retroactive suspension of another long-standing contract, the one with the satellite systems subcontract. Because when you lose good standing with one agency, the rest don't call to ask how you're holding up. They assume you're compromised. And then the phone calls started. Clients, vendors, quiet messages worded like breakups from people afraid to get messy. We're pausing upcoming collaboration. We'll revisit partnership opportunities in the next fiscal. We're initiating a reevaluation of vendor compliance requirements. Which all meant the same thing. We're out. In the office, it was open war. Executives canceling meetings with thin excuses. Legal running on fumes. Tyler, gone. Left a resignation email with no punctuation and a smiley face. HR scheduled resilience training. No one attended. Half the staff put their LinkedIn profiles on public. Then came the internal investigation. Board mandated. Independent. Brutal. Everyone knew who'd kicked the domino, and for a second, it looked like the CEO might try and pull the oldest trick in the corporate survival handbook. Blame the woman who left. He stood in front of the board, tired tie, bags under his eyes like carry-on luggage, and opened with the line, "Clearly there was a failure in the transition process." He implied, never outright said, that I had left without adequate notice, that my role hadn't been transparent, that I might have even known the damage it would cause, as if I'd slithered out in the night with secrets in a duffel bag. That's when legal spoke. A woman I'd never liked much, but who, God bless her, understood the weight of federal paperwork better than she did small talk. "We reviewed all documentation," she said flatly. Ms. Morgan filed her termination report exactly within protocol. The Form SF-328 was submitted within the mandatory timeline. She notified the contracting office, DHS, and the Defense Industrial Base. She designated no successor because no successor was cleared. Everything was by the book. The room got quiet in the way rooms do when truth slices the air like a scalpel. The CEO looked down. He didn't argue. But the CFO? He leaned back, muttered just loud enough for the mic to catch it. "Our charter was her clearance. We can't bid again until we rebuild from scratch." There it was. The sentence that took 10 years to earn and 10 days to watch crumble. Rebuild from scratch, meaning new application, new vetting, new compliance infrastructure, meaning re-audits, reauthorization, and likely losing every classified opportunity in the pipeline. They'd turned off the light and shot the electrician. And me? I was sitting at my kitchen table that evening, polishing off a piece of peach cobbler from a cafe near the Pentagon, watching a documentary about bees. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't popping champagne. I was calm. The kind of calm you feel when you walk out of a burning building knowing you didn't strike the match, but you made sure the fire exits were unblocked. I hadn't sabotaged a damn thing. I hadn't leaked. I hadn't plotted. I hadn't even spoken out. I just stopped holding the line. And they, so convinced I was background noise, never realized the weight I'd been carrying until I let it go. The company didn't collapse because of me. It collapsed because no one else knew where the beams were. The email came late, tucked between a gardening newsletter and a shipping confirmation for a mug I didn't remember ordering. Subject line, panel invite, oversight and ethics in high-stakes compliance. The sender was someone I vaguely remembered meeting once at a defense conference years ago, the kind of woman who wore neutral suits and could recite CFR citations from memory. She wrote, "We'd be honored to have you share your perspective. Everyone's talking about what happened. Your silence said more than some people's manifestos." I sat with it for a moment. Not flattered, not even surprised, just steady. The panel was virtual, of course. Half of us in clean blouses and pajama pants. A few hundred attendees, all muted. Government people, compliance officers, contract managers, folks who'd had to learn the word whistleblower in real time. When it was my turn, I didn't talk about the CEO, or the contract, or the exact timeline. I talked about responsibility, about what it means to know the rules, not to twist them or move fast and break things, but to honor them. I told them how compliance isn't the fire escape. It's the walls that keep the damn building standing. I said it soft even. No drama. Just truth. When the panel ended, I logged off and checked my inbox. New message. No subject. Just the preview. "Your story's making rounds. You did it with elegance." It was from a woman I didn't know. Different firm. Different state. Same industry. Same battlefield. She didn't need to explain. We speak the same language. The kind carved into the margins of forms and policies and security protocols no one celebrates until everything's on fire. I looked up from the screen and exhaled through my nose. There was no vindication in it. Just peace. Just gravity, finally doing its work. Across town, things were still unraveling. The CEO resigned. The press release used the usual phrases: pursuing other opportunities, transitioning leadership, grateful for his contributions. Meanwhile, the company was officially under federal audit. Half the board was lawyering up. The other half was pretending they'd raised concerns privately all along. I didn't bother watching. Instead, I logged into a new portal, a secure consulting dashboard for cleared professionals. The background was sterile gray. The font, dull. Nothing dramatic. Except one thing. My clearance, still active. I clicked into a new contract opportunity, reviewed the scope, checked the timeline, scrolled to the bottom where the client name was listed. It was a competitor. Direct. Aggressive. Hungry. The kind of firm that had always played second fiddle to my old company. Until now. I hovered for a second, then clicked accept. Not to get even. Not to spike the football. Just to keep doing what I do. Quietly. Precisely. Without fanfare. Because this was never about revenge. It was about consequence. They broke themselves the moment they forgot who held the weight. And me? I just stepped aside and let gravity handle the rest.